of Decriminalizing the Black Body. I'm your host, Paulette Paine. The mission of this 4-part series, if this is your first time watching, is to create needed dialogue about the systemic racism in America and the steps that must be taken in order to guarantee the right to liberty and justice for Black people. During this series, you will hear from scholars, parents, activists, and concerned citizens whose mission it is to do the same. Please take an opportunity to post questions in the thread of this broadcast, and be sure to share this broadcast with your network. And so now for part 2, Language of the Unheard, Protest as an Anthem to Freedom. Today we'll be discussing the double standards that exist in terms of who can and who cannot protest, music as a form of protest, and we'll gauge the efficacy of social media in the fight for equity and justice, and much more, of course. But first, let me introduce you to my guests. I have with us Latessa Pearson, Dr. Latessa Pearson. She is a personal visionary, so if you're intrigued about that, please touch base with her after the broadcast. We also have Jeffrey Lanier Jones. He'll be joining us a little bit later. He's an instructor of English at Paine College, our alma mater, a historically Black college in Georgia. We also have Kirkpatrick Tyler. He is pastor of St. Mark AME Church in Los Angeles, California. Terra, who is the founder of Change Transformation and Consulting. I think I got it wrong, Terra. I am so sorry. I didn't change my script. As well as Tracy Evans, who is a social justice advocate, and last but not least, music historian and owner of JustSoulYou'llKnow.com, well, WordPress.com, is Travis Lacy. So you guys, we're going to get started with this very important topic about protest and it being an anthem for freedom. But first, I want to start off, of course, there have been protests in all 50 states. People fed up, frustrated, angry about the injustices that have been wrought upon the bodies of Black men and women. And to that end, we've seen the hashtag Black Lives Matter. And many times that Black Lives Matter anthem or call for action and justice is many times relegated to Black men. And I wanted to pose this first question to you, Tracy. I noticed on your page today, we're talking about the hashtag Say Her Name movement and the need to make sure that the Black lives of women and men are properly recognized, and that it not be a gender divided type of thing. Can you talk to us about that? Give us your perspective on that.
Well, yeah. Thank you for asking. I think the Black Lives Matter is inclusive, right? And it has a really broad mission. But within that, we have done a very good job of talking about the plight of Black men as a whole, because we know historically how they've been treated in this country. But Black women have also faced similar treatment, and our names aren't lifted up in the same manner. I really think that if you asked the majority of people to give you the names of Black men who had been harmed, mistreated, brutalized, killed by police, they can go on and on with names. And if you ask them that same question about Black women, most can't do it. And yet we are out there struggling with the same issues. So we rally when Black men are harmed, and then sometimes it feels as though when we face that same type of brutality, it's a little bit quieter, right? And so Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw actually formed that movement, I think about 5 years ago, in response to the erasure of Black women's voices in the cause. And I think it's valid. I think it's unfortunate that we needed to have a Say Her Name movement under that banner, but I think it matters. And I think, we got to be able to say more names, and not just for the sake of saying the names, but the constant reminder that we are in this struggle in the same way, that we are not just advocates, we are also victims as well. And we need everyone to stand up and say our names as well.
I appreciate that insight. Does anybody else have anything else they'd like to share? Tessa, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, that's certainly true. Thank you for asking, and thanks for the very eloquently stated facts about how Black women are actually erased from any dialogue about usually any type of racial equalities. Like Black women, we can organize movements, we can protest, we can do all kinds of things, but we're not at the leadership table, and I think that's a problem. And when you talk about the brutality of the justice system, you don't want to talk about healthcare delivery systems where Black women die disproportionately giving birth, in that first year after birth. So it's a whole lot of things that Black women's names can be spoken and lifted up in for equality.
Thank you for that thought. Kirk.
Yeah, if I could, I think this is a space where I cringe, but I always am pressing that we have to be super intentional about seeing each other just as a people, right? As we talk about women, as we talk about sisters and brothers in the LGBTQ community. One, because throughout the history of our movements, everyone has contributed, right? But two, because this topic often becomes weaponized. A television, personality or some magazine who we really don't know who's in the editor's seat or who's in the leadership seat of those media outlets, drops that in the middle of a situation. And then we as a people begin to argue with each other and miss what we actually showed up fighting for. And so I think, first, the responsibility comes upon brothers in the movement to make sure that we are acknowledging and making space and giving agency to the women who are part of the movement, primarily because most movements from the revolution all the way to the church house are mostly driven by women financially, in the numbers and who shows up, right? That's a reality. But also because when we erase the sisters, when we erase our LGBTQ sisters and brothers, we create a space for those who want to see our movements shut down to cause division inside of the family. And so I think it's such a critical area that we have to pay attention to and be intentional about supporting one another throughout the movement. And to that note, we want to wish and lift up Breonna Taylor because her birthday is today. And so we want to celebrate her and her life, and not just because she was killed at the hands of police, but also because she was an EMT worker. So when we talk about revolutionary women, she was out there giving her life so that other people could live, through this COVID pandemic. So we want to lift up her name.
Thank you for those thoughts.
If I could just add to that, I think that in many ways, to me, Black women swallow the trauma and the pain of a Black community, and we give birth to solo sorrow because people just don't make space for us to really be in grief and sorrow because we have to keep moving. And it's very similar to the enslaved people when we were shackled together and you had one who was linked to your neck, but you were a pregnant woman carrying the dead body of the enslaved person who was moving to that ship either in front of you or behind you. And so I think what we continue to see is how we continue to swallow that pain and trauma because we recognize that is an expectation, but is it a real expectation that at some point there will be a breaking point for Black women? And so I just think that we have to figure out how we deal with the trauma that has been placed upon us as Black people anywhere that you go, really in the continent. There are some places where it may be better, but certainly in America, the trauma that is placed upon the community certainly has been swallowed whole by Black women. And we need to figure out how we give birth to that pain in a way that we are not birthing children who are disenfranchised and confused based on the wound that they came from. And so I think that is the space that we have to talk about it for sure.
Very powerful, very powerful. I want to move on. So in terms of protest, we've seen and heard time and time again, unfortunately, very unfortunately, the leader of the free world made clear distinctions between white protesters in Charlottesville, calling them very good people, versus those protesting the murder of George Floyd, calling them thugs, and here recently, terrorists. How problematic is this to the institution of justice and the pursuit of that idea for Black people? Travis.
Well, when you look at that, Trump is supposed to be our leader. He's supposed to be the one that's guiding us and leading us, the right way to go with a great moral character. Obviously, he doesn't have that. So when you have someone that is not able to step up and play that role, it causes problems throughout society. You have a large amount of people who follow him, who believe in what he believes in, and do whatever he says to do. However, the problem arises because I don't want to get too real, but
go ahead.
Time to go ahead. It's the place to get real. Let's do it.
That's right.
He minimizes the African American, the black body, which he shouldn't do, and that is a horrible thing. And it sort of leaves us out in the open and not able to really. It's hard to fight for what we want when you don't have that leadership backing you the whole time. Pretty much, it's complicated. It's a bit complicated, but. When you don't have that leader that leads you, like say Obama, you don't have that backing. That's what I'm getting back to. Just that whole backing of supporting the black body that's going on, that leadership, and with him, it's not there. So,
and it's very blatant, and it does much. It does much to incite even more anger.
Yes,
we've seen rioting, and again, King said rioting is the language of the unheard, right. Because of the history, because of the systemic racism, because of all of these things that have been placed upon us, not of our own inclination, but because the world around us and the white supremacy that exists and the patriarchy that exists. So what I'm trying to say is it bursts this anger. It fuels this flame of frustration. And so we see the rioting, and some of it is not peaceful, but then of course you do have that peaceful rioting. And Terra, I saw earlier, about a couple of days ago, you had posted something about basically about this whole notion of rioting and looting and what people perceive to be I can't even think of the word, but it not being the proper way to protest. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think the reality is for many white people, there is no proper way for protest to happen. That is asking, because your question was, is it outside of or against the institution of justice? Absolutely not, because the institution of justice does not include us either. So in that regard, he is very much aligned with the institutions that exist in this country. I think, again, when we look at this notion or this idea of asking people to have peaceful protests in violent times, is absurd to most people, actually. And so and I think the post you're referring to is when I refer to, it is difficult to muster peace when you are not given the liberty of peace of mind. And so, again, you are challenged with people who demonize whatever you do. And so there is no peaceful way for us to suggest to many in white America who have enjoyed the privilege of racism that allows them to have the luxuries that they are afforded in this country. Any idea that suggests that they must give those things up that's a violent notion to them, because that's a painful thing that they know that they must shift from in order for true equity and justice to exist for Black people in this country. So again, whether it is someone who is quietly kneeling or a person who has an AK-47 that says they want a haircut, the bottom line is you're going to always see the person who is asking for the thing that you do not wish them to have as the person who is violent versus a person who approaches you with violence because they think that they are getting the thing they're supposed to already be entitled to.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add to that, Paulette?
Please.
I think in this country, rebellion has always been used to advance or defend liberty, right? So if you think back to your elementary school years and they were talking about the founders of the country, right? You would get the give me liberty or give me death, live free or die, something to the effect of like obedience to tyranny is disobedience to God. And then as soon as Black folks raise up, right? Because I don't really consider this a riot. I consider this more of an uprising, right? Mm-hmm. There is an uprising because we are at the point where we say we can't take it anymore. And I think historically there have been markers where that has happened. And so the history of this country is tied to this type of instability. And so, you know, with regard to what Terra was saying, I think we still have a situation where America's white majority wants to be comfortable. And so we can't really make change without disrupting the entire system when there is this insistence on maintaining order. But it's order not in the proper sense of the word. What they ask for in terms of order is a symbolic foot on the neck, really, right? It's asking us to continue to remain in this plight, even as they can sometimes see. They don't always, right? But sometimes they can see, and it is blatant, and the whole world is watching. And you'll still have people say, but why are they destroying the buildings? And Douglas said something to the effect of, the thing worse than the rebellion is the thing that causes the rebellion. So when you see people take to the streets en masse, and let's be clear, a lot of the damage and destruction hasn't been posed by us. And thankfully, the cameras have shown that. But even for the times when it is, to even bother to ask the question, why are they destroying property, and not ask yourselves, why am I okay with the destruction of their lives, is entirely problematic.
Kirk, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're protest with permission is a parade. It's not a protest, right? Like, if anything that we do is approved by the people who it is for the purpose of getting the message to them, it's probably not going to be effective. The whole purpose of an uprising, the whole purpose of protest is to create the same discomfort that dwells inside of the people, inside of the oppressed, right? It is to transfer the struggle and challenges that we face into the mainstream. And so I think, one, we have to stop looking for permission, stop expecting it. Like if Pharaoh would have given permission, like even when we talk about biblically, right? Because I'm a pastor, so we'll go to church real quick. The move of the people of Israel out of Egypt was actually, first they went and asked permission. Like they went to Pharaoh and said, hey, we want 3 days to go into the desert so we can worship our God. Pharaoh said, no. All right, well, now you're going to get these plagues. Now your soldiers are going to get washed over in this water. And so protest with permission is a parade. And so we should just stop looking for permission and continue to do the work that causes discomfort and disruption, because that's what protest is supposed to be. And not be concerned with whether or not those who seek to oppress us are okay with our actions. We want them to be responsive.
Thank you for that.
Can I add just one more thing to that, though? Just really quickly. I think also we have to challenge people in the use of their language, because the power of the language and the tongue is very important, because there is nothing that many Black people have experienced that has not been altered or will have a different way of euphemistically speaking those same things if white people do those same things. For instance, Black women are typically given the title of being either angry, or we are difficult, or we are intimidating. Whereas white women who have those same characteristics, they are strong, they are assertive. Same thing, if we are defending ourselves, as you saw with Ahmaud Arbery, then we are not only defending ourselves, now we are resistant. So again, the language that is used often for us is also weaponizing language. So there's very little, even if we went peacefully in the street, when people are peaceful, hands are up, people are complying, doing whatever it is, somehow we are still weaponized just by our flesh alone. So again, I am not as concerned with the titles that people place upon what is happening in the riots, because again, we are a nation of looters. So we have looted from our conception. And so again, if we go with the metaphor of birth, you have now given birth to children who have now mastered your gifts and your talents of looting and taking things that are not theirs. And so again, I'm not certain why other people don't understand the insanity of asking us to be sane in insane conditions.
Profound, true, and critical for the audience to hear and to absorb and to deconstruct and to see themselves in it all. and then begin to, like I said, deconstruct their own issues with patriarchy, with white supremacy, with privilege, with all of these things that have fed in to the plight of Black people in America in the 21st century even. Let me ask this question. How does the protest movement of our day differ from the civil rights movement? And two, is nonviolent, well, we already talked about that. So how does the protest movement of our day differ, if in any way, to that of the civil rights movement? Tessa, can you share some light on that?
Sure, thank you. And I'm enjoying everyone's words. It's just so enlightening. But I read somewhere where you can't step in the same, a man cannot step in the same river twice, because the man is different and the river is different. And that, it to me, is absolutely how this whole time and energy is unfolding. We're not the same people. It's not the same America. The politics and stuff may look the same, but it really isn't underneath. There's some other stuff. It's more sinister in some ways. We have a lot of creature comforts now, and those comforts keep us from really paying attention to how we can come together and really mobilize and strengthen our community. One of the things that I was telling my brother about the protests that are taking place is that you have to condition your heart, then you condition your mind before you can move your behind. So the way people are responding or reacting to the tragedies that have been just plaguing us for as long as we can remember, those are the things that I feel that we can take a closer look at. Like, how can we condition our hearts to really love ourselves and move forward in love? And how can we condition our minds? Because mental health is a major issue. A lot of people that you see out there, they're at their wits' end. It's just, they're so tired of how things have been unfolded in their lives. They're tired of being afraid. They're tired of living in fear. And there's one thing that I know for sure, you can only serve one master, and I grew up in the church too, and it's like, this day we serve the Lord. Well, you either serve love or you serve fear. And if you serve in fear, you can see that. You can see when you're being served, that's your core. So when you condition your heart and mind, let love be what you shine out. Let that love just kind of permeate all that you do. It doesn't mean that you don't move your behind. You still have to take action, but you have action from a place of centeredness. And I think that makes a difference. So, right now, I don't think the protests are the same. You haven't heard any mention of a church being in it or, being led by ministers and stuff like that. It's more like, oh my God, I'm tired of this. They didn't even listen to a professional athlete who has a lot of privilege because he has wealth when he tried to do it peacefully. They haven't listened to all the other things that people have done that, that will come before this huge action. In the time of COVID-19, where you have this killer virus, people are out protesting, that means something, But yeah, I think that, again, this movement, this time is different for various reasons. And when we look at and unpack some of the differences, then we can see how we can move forward. What best way to move forward? As King said, hate is too heavy a burden to bear, but it's easy to do because it's so many things that are like poking at you. Yeah, I know I woke up Sunday morning with an angry hangover, and it didn't feel right to my spirit. So I had to let that go and again, look at my own heart, look at my own mind, and then see what are some things that I can do that can empower the community.
Thank you, Tessa. Tracy, how does the movement of our day differ from that of the civil rights movement?
I think that certainly the time is different, but what I find unfortunate, so this isn't the direct answer to your question. What I find unfortunate is that there were things, when we talk about the civil rights movement of the 60s, right? There were things that we were fighting for and we are still fighting for them, right? Mm-hmm. So the civil rights movement of the 60s, right, was kind of about the basic freedoms around education, voting, those things that were like Bill of Rights kind of things, right? And then the indiscriminate killing of Black folks. Well, you come forward 50 years, we're still fighting indiscriminate killing of Black folks. We still are marginalized politically. We still are being denied access to our voting rights. We still have, substandard schools in our communities. So we're fighting some of those same things. I think, though, that what has made the difference this time around is social media, the advent of that smartphone, the fact that the things we have been saying all along are now things that other people can see. You can't deny what you see on video. Now, it may take you a long time to decide that you're going to press charges. It might take you a long time to formulate what the proper charge is, but you can't say you didn't see it. And I think what that has done is it has marginalized a greater group of people who, because people can no longer say, well, since I didn't see it, it didn't happen, or this isn't my community, or that's not my husband brutalizing, the cop brutalizing those folks, because nope, your husband's on camera, ma'am. So we see it. And I think the other part of that is that it has allowed this iteration of the struggle for justice to be international. I mean, so certainly we knew in the 60s there was the influence of Gandhi and so forth. But, if you look around the world now, you've got folks in Iran, folks in Amsterdam, like people are seeing what has happened and they are with us, right? So I think that is a tremendous difference.
Very exciting. Yes.
I just love all the things that you said. But also in the 60s, the thing that propelled the civil rights movement was they did start having video, and they started showing Europe what America was doing to American Black. And it was like, oh, now we got to do something. We got to do something because they look at us like we're ignorant now. Whereas before, when it was just at home, then it was like, oh, well, so what? But the minute it went international and somebody showed a clip to somebody and they was like, what? Then that's when they wanted to do something too. So when it was videoed here, in the 60s, dogs attacking men and stuff like that, it changed some of the opinions too.
Yeah.
So
can I?
Sure, go on, Kirk.
Can I offer something? I think there's like 4, and I'll be super quick. I think there are like 5 critical differences, right? Longevity, the movements of the past, like civil rights movement, happened over a span of I think 2 years, right? We have a hard time keeping our attention span for a couple of weeks. Discipline. The things that we're seeing where outside groups are able to agitate and take attention away from the message is something that we did not see in civil rights movement, in the apartheid movement in South Africa. Like, we were disciplined and we were able to control like our borders. We were able to control the people who would attach themselves to our movement. Coordination, I think, is the third. There's so much splintering that happens right now, and I think it takes away from our effectiveness. Meaning that back in the day, entertainers were coordinated. So we talk about Sidney Poitier, when we talk about Bill Cosby, they understood their role and they were very clear about their contribution to the movement. And then we don't have our own we don't live together. So when we talk about our political power at the ballot, it is lessened because we don't live in the same neighborhoods. We talk about our impact in the schools. All of our kids don't go to the same schools. And so we've kind of been thinned out. And then the final thing I think is critical. We don't have songs to sing. We don't have a soundtrack for the movement today, at least not that has risen up. Back in the day, we had Nina Simone. We had Harry Belafonte. We had James Brown, who were making music that drove the people out on the street. Eddie Kendricks, you got, all of that. And so I think like those things, if we were to implement them today, would give so much more power to the movement.
And Kirkland, that leads us beautifully into this next question and this whole idea around protest music. When I was in grad school, and for those of you who don't know, I went to grad school with Travis and Tessa, and it was a good time, y'all. It was such a good time. But and y'all can't tell any secrets.
I was about to say, don't tell her you
What goes on in grad school stays in grad school.
Stays in grad school.
But, before grad school, I didn't know about this protest music. I didn't even know it was a thing. And I learned about the Gil Scott-Herons, and listening to the music. I'll tell you today, as I was walking my dog, I turned on Public Enemy. And when I was growing up, I didn't really listen to Public Enemy. I didn't listen to KRS-One, and maybe I shouldn't say that in public, but I didn't. But I listened.
Your black card.
And it truly was the soundtrack. And it still is. It's still a very valid soundtrack for the struggles that Black people face. So, Travis, I want to come to you in terms of your expertise in music history. And this is a carryover question from yesterday, and a very profound question. So, of course, we're familiar with Yo Scott Heron, and this audience member wants to know, has the revolution been televised?
Well, you know what? Given this day and age and all in terms of technology, yes, it's been televised. You're able to grab your phone, bring it out into the street, and you can watch marches, protesting, even the horrible things happening here in LA, the places that are on fire. I've seen all that stuff through social media. So has the revolution been televised? Yes, it has. But on a larger note, has the sort of what Tyler was saying, does the revolution have a soundtrack? Does it have a music connected to it? And at this time, not necessarily those strong, powerful songs that speak directly to what was going on in the 60s, but we sort of have anthems that people use to help sort of elevate a situation, or to help spur you on to go ahead and be a part of a protest. So when you look at African Americans who've always sort of used music in protests, even, if you allow me to sort of say that when Black bodies first moved from Africa, when they first were stolen from Africa and brought to America, they were brought on the bows of ships. And what they did was on the ships to not sort of fight insurrection, they separated African bodies that spoke the same language. And they put people in the boat who spoke different languages, so they couldn't come together and sort of create an insurrection. But what they found out was that through travel narratives that people have written through priests, travelers, and other captains on the ship, they heard one familiar thing every time they traveled, was this overwhelming loud hum in unison, where all these people in the boat were humming the same tune. In essence, they're sort of protesting their captivity. They're protesting their sorrow. They're letting what's inside of them out. They're externalizing their hurt, externalizing their pain through music. And this is one of the first times you get Africans, but Africans who are sort of creating a protest through music. And that sort of happened throughout the whole Ma'afa, if you want to call it, or the Middle Passage. That happened pretty much all the time. Once they get to America, this whole ideal of sorrow, which is a great sorrow that has never happened before, this idea of using music or humming or music or vocal sonic sounds to create protesting for your condition happened. It's something that what happened when it birthed the blues and sadness and sorrow songs and things that African Americans would do to help soothe themselves. But all in all, it was a protest, the protest of their condition. And as we talked about before, or so to speak of, it's became a soundtrack or an anthem. So you have songs that talked about spirituals and uplifting the body. But again, it's talking about this whole ideal of protest against a current situation that you do not like. As you go on a little further on, I listen to jazz a lot and just sort of push in there a little closer to our time. Jazz artists, one jazz artist by the name of Max Roach had a song or album called We Insist. And, Abby Lincoln sings on it. And it's a thought out social protest album. It's deliberate, and what it does is to bring attention to the movement that was just beginning at the time, or in the 1960s when the album was released, that was happening at the time. And it was designed to create protests, to create a soundtrack to a movement that was going on. Later on, you get Nina Simone, who one of her first protest songs, Mississippi Goddamn, where she's protesting, she's upset about what happened to Medgar Evers in Mississippi, and also the 16th Street Baptist Church in Alabama. She writes this song where she's just outraged and talks about how mad she is with Mississippi and how mad she is with Alabama. And it's not to go too far, but it's a unique song because it uses this sort of stride piano sound, it's sort of a carnival sound, but her lyrics are just cutting and cutting and it sort of juxtaposes the song. It's amazing song you listen to. But these protest songs, again, they allow you to externalize your internal feeling. This is what the protest songs do, and they're critical because they do. They're critical to a movement because they are meant to petition the government for change, along with the sit-ins and different sort of movements and marches that are going on. The music accompanies that. It helps maintain and sustain this whole ideal, if you will, rebellion in a way that connects to the people, because music connects to the people and they understand it much better. It also creates, the protest songs also create a community. Just in the same way you have these Africans who didn't speak the same language come together and hum the same tune. The same thing happens when you introduce music into a protest. You get all these disparate people who form now a community with one ideal in mind, one action. And that's the power of music. That's the power of protest music.
Yeah, and it can create change in such a way that sometimes no other medium can.
Right.
Terra, just off top, and I know this wasn't one of the questions, pre-questions, but off top of your head, what's one protest song that sticks out to you? I know in our collective work at a nonprofit here in Atlanta, we did a lot of work in terms of communicating the message of Dr. King in this equitable society, community, the beloved community. Let's talk about some of your experiences with protest music. Is there just something that burns in your bosom in terms of the song?
Not the bosoms. I think the song that most reminds me of when I was old enough to understand my own consciousness would certainly be Fight the Power, because I was a young person who was beginning to understand my connection to history. And to Brother Travis's point, I think protest songs are the kind of the language of a stolen people. And it is our reminder that we belong in shores and our destiny is actually linked to shores that we're not currently on. And so that's why there's a rhythm in which we can talk to each other. There's a rhythm in which we can move with each other that actually does not require words. And so the humming or the moaning in times really is an interpretation of things that we know are things of the past that you don't have the lyrics for because they haven't been written yet. That is part of our destiny to the future generations. And so for me, to your original question, from the bosom, and also thinking about how she did it in the movie with Spike Lee, I would say, Fight the Power, because you had Warner Brothers, you had, I was a young woman who had come out of East New York and certainly dealt with the different things that came from the conditions of East New York. People assuming in the South that people all in the North just somehow live together, don't have racism, and that's not the case. And so I definitely think that would be the song that, again, was my awakening to my own consciousness as a young woman. And there's certainly been many other songs. I love Sister Soldier for sure. And so, I mean, it's a lot of different things. And having her come to our campus, I don't know if Tracy remembers that when we were in school, but there's a lot, but that's the one song that, again, my consciousness was raised on, because that's where I was as a young person moving into my own consciousness.
Thank you for that. Kirk and Tracy, I'm going to come back to you on this question, but audience friends, I messed up. I didn't reserve enough spaces for my guest, so I have a space, guest waiting in limbo. So I'm going to have to punch someone out to punch him back in. And Terra, no, I don't mean to be violent. I'm just going to let him in. Open the door. So on that note, Latessa, I want to get your thought, your insight on this protest movement and protest music and it being an anthem to freedom. And then we'll bring Jeffrey Lanier Jones in once Latessa provides her insight.
Yes, what everyone said is just so true. It's amazing how songs can really link us all together. And wherever it is we're going through, where we're trying to get to, the discipline of music is just, it's timeless. So when I listen to what people call Negro spirituals or hollow songs or blues, I'm from Mississippi, so we get down with the blues and that reminds me of Last Poets. I don't know if you know about the Last Poets, but I sing the Mississippi blues, and I look and see how many things have been awry, and now finally we're able to verbalize them in a way that helps our community to move forward. But yeah, protests would not exist without music. Music is definitely the thing that brings it all together. But that's the arts, isn't it? That's the whole point of the arts. The arts are just absolutely transformational and transcendental. They're the most important part of expressing what's going on inside of you in a way that's not only beneficial, but if they talk about peaceful, that's peaceful. Some of those lyrics, if you listen to the last chorus and some of the others, you're like, okay, man, they really brought the heat. It's a way for us to really express what we've been going through. And the blues did that too. I mean, in rap music even does it. They talk about the word that most people relate to women that they don't like, start with the B. It wasn't always about women. It was about treatment. It was about the type of cars. It was about, there's a whole bunch of ways they did did a wordplay with that. But yeah, rap is rap from the 90s and 80s. I don't know much about today's rap.
The golden era of rap.
Yeah, the golden era of rap was very, you talk about fight the power. I saw that video in my head, with Rosie Perez. I mean, it's one of those things that really does unite us as a people and where we are and how we move forward. So thanks so much for allowing me to be here.
No, Tessa, the pleasure is all mine, and I'm so sorry for my snafu. I do want to bring Jeffrey in to glean his insight, and you guys, once I pop Jeffrey in, Kurt, I want your thoughts on protest music, Tracy, and then we'll pose one more question, and then I think we have another question from the audience. So, Tessa, thank you so very much. For you all who had questions.
Bye, Tessa.
Bye.
Bye, Tessa.
Peace and blessings. Peace and blessings.
Peace and blessings, my friend. If you want to connect with Tessa, her information is in the description of this episode. Thank you, Tessa. Take good care. And now we will pop Jeffrey in. Give me 1 second. Here we go. All right. So Jeffrey Lanier Jones, you all, he's on board. Jeffrey, about protest music. I want to go to Kirk Tyler to talk about his insight on protest music. I want you to get some consideration and let us know. You're going to turn down, you might have something open on the computer or microphone because we have feedback. So if you have a mic open, you might want to close it. Okay, Kurt, give us your thoughts on protest music. What song stands out to you?
Yeah, I'm as a musician myself, I love protest music, and not just the stuff that came from artists, but the songs that came from the people who were sitting in the meetings and stuff, where they just came up with something, like somebody had like a little tune and people start clapping, and because those were the things that drove the people on the ground, right? Like what we get from the artist is what connects. It gives like a universal message to those people that might not be connected to the movement directly. But what comes out of the church meetings, what comes out of the gatherings, the Black Panthers have a song, and the words miss me, but it's like da 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 da, free Huey, da 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 da, free Huey, right? Because that was directly connected to the people in South Africa. In the South African movement, they have a dance called the Toy Toy, right? And the Toy Toy is it is a weapon. It's a weaponized dance. It's a weaponized song. And so someone said, form the unit and fight. Form the unit and fight. Form the right. And so that was used as a way to encourage people. And there is a very physical march that goes on with the Toy Toy. If you've ever seen Serafina or a Mandala Revolution in 3 parts, they show the Toy Toy as a weapon that encouraged the people. I mean, because of the movement, it took this encouraged amount of physical stamina to do so. And it was one of the things that actually scared Afrikaner policers, because you think of, 100 young people coming towards you with a very steady and aggressive march, all in one accord and one voice. So I think the music that comes from the artist is awesome because it tells the story to those who are not connected. But the music that comes from the heart of the people, the freedom songs that brothers and sisters made up while they were riding on the bus from, Georgia to Selma, all of those things are so powerful because they emanate from the hearts of the people.
Jeff, so I told the audience that you and I went to school together, and before I went to a historically Black college, I was just in public school. They sort of were and are, but I wasn't exposed until I attended an HBCU. Now, somebody has a mic open. There's feedback, so if you have your phone turned up or another device, mute it because of the feedback. But I didn't know about this music. And then when I went to Paine College and under the leadership of Shirley A.R. Lewis, Dr. Shirley A.R. Lewis, she was intentional about exposing her students to the various music forms. And so, I developed this appreciation for jazz, this appreciation for spiritual, sang in the choir. So Jeff, because we come from that background, talk to us a little bit about protest music, why it's important, and how it does become an anthem of freedom for a people, specifically Black people. Jeff, can you hear me?
Wow. Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
I can.
Yeah.
Jeff, did you get
Can you hear me?
Did you get the question? Okay, go on. The floor is yours.
Yes, I did. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought. Yes, protests for Black people has been quite important over the years. That's one of the things that was impressed upon us at Paine, that it really didn't start in the 60s. We can go all the way back to the founding of the country. Black people have been using music as a way of resistance from the very beginning, from the time they were shackled on the ships to move from Africa to America and to other parts of the world. Music was the one that bound them together. And so, I've been, for instance, I've been thinking a lot about Nina Simone's "I Wish I Knew How to Be Free," because these times kind of remind us of that a country that has told us that we are equal in the sights of God, but their reality does not depict that, makes us realize that they really mean what they say. But Black musicians have already made an unequivocal stance that they are going to affirm their humanity despite the inhumanity that was shown to them, to confront the trauma that they had done. And I think that's where we're at in this moment right now. We're confronting a trauma, and we're trying to find out ways to cope with the trauma, because America has not the language, as we talked about earlier, to deal with it, or do they don't have the interest in having the language to do it. So now it's up to Black people to create this language. They've already created language. We just need to build on the language to affirm our own Black humanity and eventually our Black liberation.
And Jeff, before we move on, let me ask you this. In terms of the civil rights movement and the protests that existed then, are there differences between that period and now?
Yes, it is. Now, the struggle for freedom has never changed. Let's be real clear. That the struggle for freedom has never changed. It's because some people have frozen the civil rights movement between 1955 and 1968. But as Al Sharpton told us a long time ago when I was a student at Paine, he said, when did the civil rights movement end? So the civil rights movement is a continual. So it's just added more layers. Like, for instance, I don't know if y'all heard about when Will Smith said, well, we always knew about racism, but now racism is being televised. But that's not true. Historically, racism has always been televised. They just said white people never listen to it. And so when the civil rights came, so when television came to dramatize the atrocities of the 60s, this was a moment when King and others were able to use that platform to understand that they are not considered citizens. They are considered inhumane. And for a country that posits life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, this is a major contradiction and a problem that we must address right now. So I think that's what's happening. That's why we see these protests in the streets, because I think they're building on what the civil rights movement done are critics of the civil rights movement, saying that it was too passive, too nonviolent, because we live in a country that is built on violence, and it has shown that, and we've seen this in the past week, that they'd rather use this kind of masculine language. As the president used, they're weak if you don't bring tanks out. That's aggravating people who are already upset and mad that America does not recognize them in their full humanity. So they are pulling from the language of the civil rights movement, but they're adding their own spin to it. I think that's the reason why Black Lives Matter is important. But I tell my students all the time, well, Black people have always cried Black Lives Matter. They just didn't call it Black Lives Matter. So they are part of a long tradition of protest since the beginning. And so the civil rights movement, I think sometimes we romanticize the civil rights movement and we freeze them in time, when actually we can learn very powerful lessons that allow us in terms of activism and liberation. I think that's what these young people are interested and are demonstrating, that they are seeing that, and they're mad because of that, because they thought that racism was over. Now they're facing a country that racism is very much so alive. It's just changed the nature. Mm-hmm. So, I think this is a good time. So I think in this time, they're just using new techniques. They're using more methods, but I think they're building on what the civil rights movement has started.
Thank you for that insight, Jeffrey.
Can I just add one thing really quickly? I think what you see now for young people is a manifestation of anger and disappointment, that although we may live slightly different, we are still dying the same as we did in the civil rights movement. And I think for young people now, that is what you are having. This rage that they have is because I think there was a hope, perhaps, that we wanted things to be different for our children. And our children are now in that space of hopelessness, that they don't know when is this going to actually change, because 50 years ago, the same people that every person who's been a commentator this week has called out, Martin Luther King and all that, but you killed Martin Luther King. So again, I think that's what you see for our young people right now, is the rage that says this is how our disappointment and I think some of it is a fear that 50 years from now, they still will be dying the same. And I think that's the place they are saying we cannot afford for another generation to have to still die the same, even if the conditions in which they live slightly change for another generation.
Thank you, Terra. Let me ask two more questions. We definitely want to make sure we incorporate the voices of our audience. Tracy, this question is for you, and I'll tap into you, Kirk, next. Why didn't we fight when Colin Kaepernick protested? Why didn't we fight and stand up behind him, as we are doing, of course, with the senseless murder of George Floyd? Tracy? So
wait, we didn't fight? Who didn't fight? I mean, so what is it? Is the question, why didn't we go out into the streets?
I would assume.
So, I think that's unfortunate. I think that's part of what happens when people become comfortable, right? So we saw this brother put his career on the line, right? But it was, it got to be somewhat, the issue was diluted, right? Because some people tried to make it about football, right? So, and then what is the NFL doing? And then, there were so many things behind it, but I think that the issue there was that it was one person, and we probably as a community didn't have a strong enough response to support him. And that goes back to what Kirk was saying earlier about the fact that, we don't all live in the same place. We don't mobilize the same way. So we've got to do some things differently. I think that the protest that Kaepernick waged was effective in terms of getting us talking. Maybe not as effective in terms of a response. And so when people say, well, why do these uprisings turn violent? Why is that, right? Why is there so much aggression in it? Well, you respond to aggression. People didn't respond to Kaepernick in the knee in the way that they should have, right? I think that it did lead to a lot of folks of color saying, I'm not going to watch football. So there was that. I don't know how much the rest of society cared. Perhaps if all of these football players had said, I too will put my career on the line, and now you will not have us to entertain you. Because historically, that is what people have liked from us, right? That we serve as their entertainment at their beck and call. Monday night, you know what's going down. I'll be entertained. But to be able to ask folks to all have that same willingness to risk their careers when we don't have a way of mobilizing en masse, or we have not yet used an effective way of mobilizing en masse at this time, is a bit problematic. And if I could just add to that, though, not directly related to the question, I do struggle with this idea because if you followed the civil rights movement as it was prior, 54 to 68, not this, just 1965 through 68. We had artists that were also activists, right? And so I have a tendency, and it may be unfair, to look at people that have public platforms and expect them to speak out on our behalves in a responsible way. And so we had that community of people to do that, those artists that did that before. Now I wonder, well, who are those people that we have now? And because everyone is entitled to opinions, we have a lot of folks who have public platforms and they get up there and they say absolutely the wrong thing, right? Because we're asking people who have never studied history, came out of, poor school systems, right? Didn't get access to the information they needed, and now they have opinions. And those opinions, not based in fact, are also then used to divide us, right? And so I think that we need Kaepernick, but we need a lot of people in other avenues, right? Other venues to be able to speak up. But I think that there also needs to be a smaller conversation about the people that get out and speak for us. What do they speak? What do they say? How do they say it? And how do they use their platforms so that we don't have dissenters and folks with misinformation being used to divide the message that we need to get out?
Travis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I mean, when I think about the Kaepernick situation, I was extremely upset with how the NFL treated him. And I thought when it happened, I was behind him 100%. I'm thinking, oh, everybody's going to be behind this. This is going to be amazing. We're going to get some stuff done. He's protesting the destruction of Black bodies. Let's get it. Let's do this. Nothing happened. I mean, the NFL came in, changed the narrative, ushered him off the field. He hasn't been back since. And you have this gaping hole of like, what is going on? When you ask that question, why haven't we fought for him? I kind of think we sort of didn't fight for him at all. I mean, I remember on my Facebook page, I wrote paragraphs and stuff and had arguments with people day in and day out about taking the knee and what it meant. And they're coming back to me with a totally different narrative about the flag and these sort of things. But just like Tyler was saying, you sort of get people we're not in the same place. I mean, I had friends that I'm going to watch no matter what. I love football. I'm going to watch the sport and, hope Kaepernick can play again. But if not, oh, well, we're just not in the same place. We're not pulled together. We're not a community. I don't live near you. You don't live near me. We have different socioeconomic backgrounds now. You used to be more unison and more cohesive. That's not there anymore. And that I was really upset about that. And just when I look at it now, what's going on now, I'm like, this is what Kaepernick was talking about. And you have some people who are sort of saying, oh, this is horrible. What happened to this guy Floyd in the street and what's going on. I'm like, this is what Kaepernick was talking about, the destruction of Black bodies. And we had to do something about it then. And even before then, and before that, and 50 years ago, this something should have been done or has to be done. But you're just now sort of to the point where you say, I sort of get what's going on. And for me, that was just real upsetting. And so people are just now starting to come around who I know that, to what's actually going on. And now they're being part of the protests or say, what can we do? And things like that. But I was angry about it, so the whole Kaepernick situation. That was my take on it.
Paulette, can I just say one thing? I think also if you examine the brutality of the sport of football. His thing would have been antithesis to the sport itself as well. So if you begin to examine the brutality of Black bodies outside of the sport of NFL, then perhaps there will become a consciousness to examine the brutality of Black bodies within the sport itself as well. When you have these people who are now dying of concussions, people who kill themselves because of injuries that they have acquired in this sport, and the sport has not taken ownership of what the responsibility they bear to what they've done, and the overwhelming majority of players are Black players. Again, if the consciousness outside of the stadium is around the brutality of Black body, the fear is then what happens when that consciousness moves inside the stadium, and we have to examine how we are treating these people who play this sport and entertainers. It's not much different than the gladiator sports from many years ago. So again, it's that same thing that's the level of conversation I think people should have been having as well. It is not just the outside the stadium consciousness that we needed to live. It is what is happening inside that stadium to these Black bodies that are brutalized as well.
Thank you for that, Terra. Now, Kirk, I want to get your insight on that, but I also want to add a little bit more to your plate. So in closing, and this is for everyone, this is a two-part question. If the officers are not sentenced and subsequently serve the full context of their time, what do you think will be the next steps in terms of protest and just in terms? What's the next step? And what would you ask white people to consider as they protest on behalf of Black people? So, Kurt, we want you to address briefly the Kaepernick situation and then this two-part question. And then we'll go to Jeff, Terra, Travis, and Tracy, and then we'll close out.
All right. So, Brother Colin Kaepernick, unfortunately, I think Colin Kaepernick was being prophetic, right? And the unfortunate thing about prophets is people don't listen to them till it's too late. So now everybody wants to kneel, right? That's like the thing, like, take a knee with us. We'll take a knee with you. Come on, let's everybody take a knee. The NFL has issued an apology. And so I think today he stands as a prophetic voice because he was trying to tell us, well, let's kneel and take a moment to think about this right now, because if we don't, what's coming, we will not be able to bear. I think in terms of protest and organizing, I don't know that we understand today the science of protest and organizing. I think that the vast majority of us believe that something happens and we react, and we don't understand all of the work. Like, we don't understand the organizing of a Baynard Rustin, right? And his importance to as a strategist in the civil rights movement. We don't understand that the bus boycott was something that was planned long before Rosa Parks. It just was that her story. There's actually another young sister who had done the same thing, but because she was pregnant, her profile didn't match the movement, right? And we see the same thing today. One of the reasons that the George Floyd murder has gone so far is because it was like perfect, right? We have a full video, so nobody can say, oh, we don't know what happened. We have a person who they've tried to find all the bad stuff, and none of it was relevant to what was happening right then. And so it's as close to perfect as we're going to get. Like, even officers are like, oh man, that was really bad, right? It doesn't show him resisting. So the same thing has to happen now. We don't understand the science. The bus boycott was successful because they had already coordinated with folks not to ride the bus. When Colin Kaepernick stepped out with his part of the movement, I don't know that they had done coordinating with other players to say, look, here's what I'm going to do. And when I do this, this is the responsibility of all of you others who agree that this is our movement. What that also would have given them is to know and see those voices who are going to dissent, so that they then would be able to prepare to know this player is not for it. So they're going to say something crazy. This player is going to try to circumvent our movement. So let's put something in place for them. And the other thing is that movements are weapons of proximity, coordination, collaboration, and consensus. And if we don't have those things, not with the people. The people will always get out in the street once something is popping, but with the folks that are right there with us. Again, about us living near each other and having some common interest. So I think that the people couldn't get behind him until those who were connected, who he was in proximity with, got behind him. So I wish he and Jay-Z would have had that conversation when he was, about to make that move. I wish he and the NFL Black Players Association had that conversation before he made that move. I wish he would have consulted more than the brother who, the white brother who was in the military before he made that move, because like real liberation happens when we coordinate and collaborate before we take the action. The second question is, what happens if they do not come with a guilty verdict for George Floyd, for Breonna Taylor, for Ahmaud Arbery? Because I think that's the other problem is we in our minds, we just waiting on the George Floyd verdict. What we really need to be looking at is, here are 4 in the span of a month of our people who have been murdered. And so we are going to keep the pressure on until we have a verdict for all of these people, because we will allow them to represent the totality of our people's experience. So I think if any of those come back, and this is going to sound crazy to y'all, if any of those come back not guilty, we will not do anything but mourn.
Right.
Because if we are waiting for a verdict to decide what happens, we've already lost.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right.
If we're waiting for a verdict to decide how we respond, we've already actually lost the battle. Like, this conversation is a moot point, because these are just the recent murders of our people. If we're looking for justice that goes beyond what we've currently experienced, then it actually doesn't matter what the verdict is. We're going to use this momentum today to get what we know we deserve. So you either going to give this to us no matter what happens in these verdicts, or we're going to have a problem today. If we waiting, because some of these cases won't be done for years, and people going to be asleep. They done got a nice new job after COVID is done, and they don't want to risk that job. It's going to be new TV shows on Netflix that we could stream, and then we'll just be back in this system. So if we're waiting for the verdict from one or all of these to figure out what our response is going to be, then we already lost. I think that we need to decide today, these are the terms that we're fighting for right now, and we will not let up until we have them, regardless of what. Now, it will be wise of you, because there's going to be some folks that nut up. It will be wise of you to bring justice in those places. However, we're not going to wait for 2 years for y'all to tell us these people are not guilty. We want these results now and today.
Thank you for that. Jeff, you're up. Jeff?
Yes. I think since yes, I'm here.
I can.
You hear me? King King mentioned in his I Have a Dream speech that if they don't I'm talking about the first part. We talk about the second part of King's speech. They never talk about the first part of the speech. It was very, very radical. He mentioned very clearly that if they do not do something about it, that the whirlwinds of revolt, notice the language he uses, the whirlwinds of revolt will happen. So, because we've gotten to the point that George Floyd and the past murders have illustrated to us, we can no longer sit on the sidelines anymore. It's not helping Black people. In fact, it's killing Black people. But I tell some of my friends, I'm tired of mourning. I'm tired of crying. I'm tired of praying for families. I'm tired. I need some real action and justice now, because otherwise, so we're going through this post-traumatic stress, post-traumatic slavery, as Joy DeGroy talks about. We're going through this very important time, and just people are, and my suspicion is that the protests will get bigger and they will get louder. Because they have already made sure, particularly in places like Los Angeles and Minnesota, in Atlanta even, that they're not going to take no for an answer. They will go out into the streets and protest. Now, I do think that's part one Part two is that we organize and start meeting with our mayors and our city councilmen and our representatives, because just going out in the streets is not going to help it, because clearly the law has to be changed. These are unjust laws that are affecting Black people and they're affecting them indiscriminately. And we've got to make, we can't leave it at protest. We have to organize with these people. We have to let them know that what we did on the streets, we really do mean in the conference room. We need this to happen all over, because if we're going to be the America that they say we are, this must happen. So I think that's the first thing. In terms of what we should say to white people, I was having a discussion. One of my classmates from high school is all about this all lives matter. This is a Latino person, and I was quite concerned with his viewpoint because it seemed to miss the point that Black folk have never said that all lives did not matter. The problem is that all lives do not matter, because if that's the case, we would not be seeing the preponderance of Black death, at least in the past 20 years, but really it's since the beginning of the century, and there's profit off of Black death. Not only is it Black death in the street, but many people are profiting. That's why some people are saying in the Black Lives Matter, don't be careful about some of these protests, because they are masquerading. The detractors are used to move people from the real issues and the real change that needs to happen. They're trying to use they're used as a distraction, and so we can't be distracted right now. We have to be very, very focused, because this is a system of racism. This is a system that has always kept Black people down. It is very important that we say Black people, because we use the term people of color, but that's to minority groups together and not acknowledging their experiences, when very clearly that Black people are being attacked. Not Latino people, not white people, not Asian people, Black people are getting attacked. And we need to make that very clear to them that, yes, we want all lives to matter, but until you realize that Black lives are not disposable, that they're integral to the foundation of this country, then you will see these protests. But the only thing I plead is that we need to use anti-racist language. That's the issue. We need to use anti-racist language. Dr. Toni Morrison talks about how language can be oppressive. And I think that's what's happened. I've been thinking a lot about what kind of language we need to use. The language that has been used to describe these situations has been oppressive. So we need to figure out ways to not use oppressive language, but anti-racist language, to enable a new type of power that will, again, affirm Black humanity and help other people. To be honest with you, I'm not interested in telling white people how to treat Black people. I'm not interested in it because they didn't do that with us. So I'm not very interested in it, just to be quite frank. But I think it's important that we do open the floodgates to help them understand that you've got to see my humanity. And even if you don't see humanity, I live in my humanity. And I think that's been the cry of Black people since our arrival into the United States.
Thank you, Jeff. Terra, Travis, Tracy, just really quickly, tell us what you would encourage of white people to consider as they protest on behalf of Black people.
Oh, I forgot about that one.
That's fine.
Go ahead,
okay.
Tracy.
So I think as we think about protest, right? I don't want it to just be this idea of what's happening in the streets. I know that it's difficult. Going back to your question about why we didn't fight, I think that Kirk is right. People didn't know how to fight. They didn't know how to link all of their little activities, right? So one person says, in that case, I won't watch the NFL, and somebody else says, well, I'm signing this color of change petition, right? But it's not coordinated, right? But people did what they thought they could do in their spaces. So I think when you ask the question about, what do we want white people to do? I think in a very basic level, if I'm thinking about the protest and just in the streets, please don't get out there and start breaking windows and hashtagging Black Lives Matter on buildings when it's not us, right? Like, you might be outraged, but we take the blame. We take the blame for that. So you too have to be strategic about how you fight for us. But I think in real life terms, I think part of the way of protesting what Black folks have to go through is just analyzing your daily life. Like, are you someone who commits microaggressions against Black folks at work and in the grocery store? Are you a Karen? Like, please stop being Karens, right? So think about what that looks like in your own daily life. We spend at least 8 hours a day at work. I know that is exhausting for me often, right, in predominantly white spaces. So the constant having to look at what's the HR policy, what are people allowed to say, when you look at who's hired, who's promoted, what's the retention rate, like why do Black folks, and in this case, maybe even people of color as a whole, why do they leave the organizations more quickly? Who's represented on your board? I think all of those things in a workspace matter. And then I think outside of a workspace, it's just kind of looking for those microaggressions and also being thoughtful about what you see happening to the people that you would consider friends, the people that you say you like. I have white friends, white folks that I've worked with that I considered colleagues and was surprised to realize that they thought of me as friends. Because I thought, really, you didn't speak up when these blatant things happened. We aren't friends. You consider yourself your friend, my friend? No, that's not how that works, right? And it's because they don't stand up and look at the things that we go through and say that's not right. I was talking to a white friend the other day, and she said that she's having these conversations with her children about race, and she wants them to walk in their own agency. And I said, well, what are your children wanting to do? And I think they're about 12. And she said that they were following white people who were following Black people at the grocery store and then yelling at them. Right. And so I understood that as okay, that might not be ideal, but these are children that are now looking to see what's happening to Black people in the spaces around them. And I think we have far too many white adults who like to say that they're allies, but don't know what that really means and haven't analyzed it in a way that is helpful to us. And when we just out live in our day-to-day lives, if you want to consider yourself an ally, you've got to look at your own role, not only in the behaviors you use against us, but in stopping the behaviors that others use against us as well.
Travis, Terra, quickly.
I'll just say, just to piggyback on what Tracy was saying, simply put, they need to maintain alliances with us. They need to create alliances with us. And together we can do so much more. I think if we just come as a group, as one Black body group, only so much can happen. Again, we're not completely together, but we come together with an alliance of white people, things might work out a little better. They might listen to what's going on. Sad to say, but they might listen if you have more of that on your side. So maintain alliances and create alliances is what I would say to do, just as a quick thing to say.
And in terms of that whole social media piece, certainly, posting pictures and images and resources, but it extends far beyond, posting images and resources to social media.
I'm not sure if real quick, in LA, I'm in LA, and when I saw the riots and all the terrible things that were happening, there were so many white people involved in what was going on. And I thought, wow, this is interesting. Are they actually aligned with us, or are they just angry as well, or they just want to be out on the street? You have a mixture of a bunch of things that were going on. But the amount of attention they got just from that, not just being a small group of Black folks, but a group of white folks, especially in Santa Monica and the West Side, there are tons of white folks, almost at times rivaling the amount of Black folks that were there. And they got so much attention. I think if you take that, keep those alliances together and move in a positive way to help create change and change part of the system that's going on, I think that will go far into helping making America the way what it should be.
Thank you, Travis. Terra, close us out.
Come on, Terra.
Come on.
I would say I started with a metaphor around pregnancy, and I'll end with one. I think if white people are to understand, and the question I would have for them is, what is their threshold for pain? because in order for us to give birth to the true liberation and the justice and equity that Black people deserve in this country, we are going to be considered, we have to consider ourselves as having a difficult pregnancy, and we are now in for a hard labor. But the only way that it will be birthed is we're going to have to be pushed. And the bottom line is, if you're not going to keep pushing, I don't need you out walking the streets with me. If you're not in boardrooms demanding that more people look like me in those boardrooms, if you're not in this position of power and you are not advocating, for instance, if you are in an equity position right now as a white person and you are reaching out to Black friends to tell you what you should do with equity, then you should also be asking yourself, why am I in this position, instead of moving aside and allowing the person who I've called to ask for equity information to put them into this position. So it will require that there are certain things, and the reason why I say your threshold for pain, because there are things that they must have to give up in order for true equity to be true for us as a Black people and for justice to be real. There are things that they will have to be given up, and it will be painful for people, because the paradigm of power has to shift in order for us to have true liberation, justice, and equity as Black people in America. But you got to keep pushing.
And look, I wish we could go on for another hour, because this panel is powerful. It's dynamic. And I knew when I was given the names and the faces of the people that needed to be on this panel, they would deliver, and they would deliver powerfully. So thank you each so much. Now we have some more questions. I just petitioned to the guests if you'll go back into the thread, because there's some questions. In fact, I have one right now. If you could go back into the thread and just comment on the questions that we missed. And one of those questions, if you'll look out for it, guest, what sources do you use to keep up with the current Black social issues? Should I look to the BLM website? So this is a white person asking, what sources do you use to keep up with the current Black social issues? And should I look to the BLM website? And my producer just told me that no, that wasn't a white person. My apologies. So, guess if you
that was about to change the answer, Paulette.
Because look, Black people are learning. There are everybody is on a level, and so we cannot dismiss the fact that while white folks are learning, there are some of us that we're learning too, because again, the educational system in America has done Black people and the world a disservice, because we are not taught our history. We are not taught the true nature of our history. So yeah, there's some Black people that don't know. And so we are learning in this process to freedom. And I know that when we stand together as one, change can happen, but there has to be this desire. We have to be so insatiably hungry for the liberation of Black people that we stay in this posture of birth. And so, Kurt, Tracy, Jeffrey, Terra,